Today, I speak English with confidence. I join meetings, explain my ideas clearly, and have real conversations without fear. But this was not always my reality. 5 months before everything changed, I couldn't even say a full sentence in English without freezing. Simple questions like, "How are you?" felt like mental battles. My mind was full of thoughts, but my mouth refused to cooperate. Every word took effort. Every sentence felt heavy. My name is Jake. I'm 26 years old, and I'm from Brazil. For a long time, English was the invisible wall between me and the life I wanted. Not because I was lazy, not because I wasn't intelligent, but because I didn't know how to learn it the right way. I want to be clear about one thing from the start. This story is not about talent, it's not about money, and it's definitely not about being good at languages. This is a story about frustration, about embarrassment, about failing when it matters most, and more importantly, it's a story of transformation. If you have ever stayed quiet in a conversation because you were afraid of making mistakes, if you have ever felt invisible because you couldn't express who you truly are, if you have ever thought, "English just isn't for me," then this is not just my story, it's yours. But to understand how everything changed, we need to go back to the moment before I realized how powerful English really was, back to the dream that started it all. A dream built without English. For as long as I can remember, I wanted to work in technology. I loved computers. I loved logic. I loved solving problems that most people avoided. While others saw lines of code as confusion, I saw structure and creativity. Programming gave me a sense of control, a feeling that if I worked hard enough, I could build something meaningful from nothing. My dream was clear. I wanted to become a software engineer at an international tech company. Not a small local firm, not a safe, comfortable job. I wanted to work with the best minds in the world on products used by millions of people. So I did what I knew how to do. I studied relentlessly. I practiced coding day and night. I built projects, fixed bugs, failed, learned, and improved. While others relaxed on weekends, I stayed home debugging programs. While my friends went out, I stayed focused on becoming better at my craft. Over time, that effort paid off. My technical skills grew stronger. My confidence as a developer increased. But there was one thing I kept pushing aside: English. I told myself it wasn't urgent. I told myself skills mattered more than language. I believed that if I became good enough technically, English would somehow stop being a problem. Deep down, I knew my English was weak. I could read a little. I understood basic words. But speaking? That was another story. Conversations felt chaotic. Native speakers talked too fast. My thoughts became tangled before they ever reached my lips. Still, I ignored the warning signs. I convinced myself that English was optional, something I could fix later. After all, I was a developer, not a public speaker. Code was universal, right? That belief stayed with me for years, until the day I received an email that made my heart race. An opportunity had arrived. The kind of opportunity people wait for their entire lives. And I was about to learn, painfully, that no matter how talented you are, if you can't communicate, the world may never see your value. The email that felt like a ticket out. I still remember the exact moment I saw the email. It was an ordinary day, nothing special. I was sitting at my desk, scrolling through my inbox without any expectations. Then I saw the subject line, and my heart skipped a beat.
Congratulations, you have been selected for an interview. For a second, I just stared at the screen, unsure if my eyes were playing tricks on me. I read it again, and then again. The words didn't change. It was real. A major tech company in the United States had reviewed my application. Out of thousands of candidates, they had chosen me. Excitement rushed through my body. My mind exploded with possibilities. I imagined myself working in a modern office, surrounded by brilliant engineers, building products that mattered. I imagined living in a new country, earning a salary I had only dreamed of, finally feeling like all my sacrifices had paid off. This was the moment I had been working toward for years. I told my family. I told my friends. Everyone congratulated me. They believed in me, maybe even more than I believed in myself. For the first time in a long while, the future felt wide open. But beneath the excitement, there was a quiet fear I refused to face. The interview would be in English. I tried to push that thought away. I told myself I would manage. I reviewed my technical knowledge, prepared answers about my projects, and practiced explaining my experience, mostly in my head and mostly in my native language. I didn't practice speaking out loud. I didn't simulate real conversations. I didn't prepare for what truly mattered. Instead, I relied on hope. I convinced myself that once the interview started, the words would somehow come, that adrenaline would carry me through, that English would magically stop being a problem. The interview day arrived faster than I expected. I sat in front of my computer, adjusted my camera, took a deep breath, and clicked the link. That was the moment everything changed.
When words betray you. The screen loaded, and suddenly, there they were. 3 interviewers, all native English speakers, smiling politely, waiting for me to speak. They greeted me, and immediately my chest tightened. Their voices sounded fast, too fast. The words blended together like someone had pressed the fast-forward button on a video. I recognized some sounds, some expressions, but understanding full sentences felt impossible. Then came the first question. Jake, can you tell us a little about yourself and your experience in software development? I knew the answer. I knew my background. I knew my projects. I knew my strengths. But in that moment, my mind went blank. The words were trapped somewhere inside me, refusing to come out in English. My heart started racing. My hands felt cold. I opened my mouth, and what came out barely sounded like a sentence. Yes, I am, software. I do coding. Many projects. Good. I am very good. The silence that followed felt endless. I could see their faces on the screen, still polite, still calm, but I could also feel the shift. The energy in the room had changed. Confidence drained from my body with every second that passed. They asked another question. I didn't understand it. I smiled nervously and tried to guess what they meant. I gave another broken response, even shorter than the first. My grammar collapsed. My pronunciation failed me. I wasn't communicating. I was surviving. Inside, I was panicking. I wanted to explain who I really was. I wanted to show them my passion, my dedication, my years of hard work. But English stood between us like a locked door. Finally, one of them spoke again. All right, Jake, thank you for your time. The words were polite, professional, kind, but I knew what they meant. The interview was over. When the call ended, I just sat there, staring at the dark screen. My reflection looked unfamiliar, small, defeated, embarrassed. I felt a tight knot in my stomach, a mix of shame and anger that I couldn't explain. I hadn't failed because I lacked talent. I had failed because I couldn't express myself. In that moment, a painful truth became clear. Without English, everything I had worked for was invisible, and that realization hurt more than any rejection email ever could. The truth I couldn't escape. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the interview again and again. Every broken sentence echoed in my head. Every pause felt heavier than the last. I kept thinking about how different things could have been if I had just been able to speak. I wasn't rejected because I lacked talent. I wasn't rejected because I wasn't prepared. I was rejected because I couldn't express myself. That realization hit harder than the failure itself. For years, I had convinced myself that English wasn't essential. I told myself that technical skills were enough, that language was just a bonus. But now, the truth stood in front of me, impossible to ignore. Without English, I didn't exist in that room. I felt ashamed that after years of studying, I still couldn't communicate, ashamed that I froze when it mattered most, ashamed that something so basic had the power to block my future. Anger followed quickly after. I was angry at myself for postponing English for so long, angry for choosing comfort over growth, angry for believing excuses that now sounded empty. I remembered all the times I said, "I'll learn English later." Later had arrived, and it had cost me my dream. That night, I understood something I had never fully accepted before. English was not just a language. It was access. It was visibility. It was the bridge between who I was and who I wanted to become. And right now, I didn't have that bridge.
The quiet decision. The next morning, the world looked the same, but I wasn't. I didn't announce anything. I didn't post motivational quotes. I didn't tell people I was about to change my life. The decision I made was quiet, but it was firm. I would learn English, and I would do it seriously. I had tried before. A year earlier, I had paid for an online English course. It promised fluency, confidence, and fast results. What it delivered was endless vocabulary lists, grammar exercises, and rules that felt disconnected from real life. I memorized words, I filled notebooks with grammar notes, I completed every assignment. But when it came time to speak, nothing changed. 3 months of studying, and I still couldn't hold a real conversation. That experience taught me something important. Expensive classes do not guarantee results. So this time, I refused to repeat the same mistake. Instead of asking, "What course should I buy?" I asked, "Why didn't it work before?" The answer was clear. I wasn't learning how to use English. I was learning how to study English. There's a difference. If I wanted fast results, I needed a system built for real life, not exams, not textbooks, not perfect grammar. I needed a method that trained my brain to think, react, and speak naturally. That was the moment my 5-month journey truly began. No shortcuts, no excuses, no waiting for motivation. Just a decision made in silence, followed by action. The first 15 days breaking the wrong belief. When I started, I believed the same thing most beginners believe. I need more words. I thought that if I memorized enough words, fluency would eventually appear. But after the interview failure, I finally admitted the truth to myself. I already knew hundreds of English words, and they hadn't helped me speak. So for the first 15 days, I made a strange decision. I didn't learn a single new word. Instead, I focused on something far more important, learning how to use what I already knew. The first thing I did was create what I called my survival sentences. I sat down with a notebook and asked myself one simple question: what do I actually need to say in real life? I wrote 50 short, practical sentences, nothing fancy, nothing academic, just the kind of things real people say every day. Simple phrases like, "Can you repeat that?" "I don't understand." "I'm learning English." "Can I have a coffee, please?" Every morning I read those sentences out loud, not once, not twice, 10 times. At first, my mouth felt stiff, my pronunciation was slow and awkward, but after a few days, something strange happened. My tongue stopped fighting me. The sentences began to flow automatically. The second habit changed everything. I started talking to myself in English. Whenever I was alone, English became my inner voice. In the shower, I described what I was doing. While cooking, I narrated each step. When walking outside, I spoke in my head about what I saw. I'm washing my hair. The water is warm. I'm making breakfast. These eggs are easy to cook. At the beginning, I felt ridiculous, but then I realized something powerful. This was my private classroom. No teachers, no judgment, no fear. In just 1 week, my brain started forming thoughts directly in English. The third practice was all about imitation. Every day I chose 5 sentences from movies, interviews, or real conversations. I didn't just read them, I copied them. I repeated each sentence again and again, matching the speed, emotion, and tone of the native speaker. I wasn't trying to sound perfect, I was trying to sound natural. By the end of those first 15 days, a shift had occurred. I no longer paused to translate basic sentences. English stopped feeling foreign. Confidence, for the first time, quietly appeared. But this was only the foundation. Now it was time for real practice.
Turning words into conversations. After the first 2 weeks, I could finally say simple sentences without hesitation. That alone felt like a victory. But I knew it wasn't enough. I didn't want to survive in English. I wanted to communicate. My biggest problem became clear when I tried to speak longer. My thoughts moved faster than my sentences. I knew what I wanted to say, but my brain struggled to organize the words in real time. So I created a new exercise, one that would force my brain to think and speak at the same time. I call it the question and answer expansion method. The idea was simple. I asked myself a question in English. Then I answered immediately, without overthinking. After that, I repeated the answer, adding more detail each time. For example, I started with an easy question. What did you do today? My first answer was short. I worked. Then I expanded it. I worked on my project. Again, I worked on my project for 3 hours. Again, I worked on my project for 3 hours, then I took a break. Each repetition pushed my brain to build longer sentences naturally. I wasn't memorizing anything, I was training fluency. I did this with everything: what I ate, where I went, how I felt. Every session lasted at least 30 minutes. Some days were exhausting, but week by week, my speaking speed improved. The pauses disappeared, the hesitation faded, the sentences became smoother. For the first time, English felt like a tool instead of an obstacle, and I knew I was finally moving in the right direction. Training my brain to move faster. As my sentences grew longer, I noticed another problem. I could speak, but my English still sounded slow. Native speakers talked effortlessly, while I felt like I was constantly one step behind. My brain understood the meaning, but it needed extra time to respond. That delay made conversations feel unnatural. I realized something important. Fluency isn't about knowing more English, it's about responding faster. So I adjusted my practice again. Every day I pushed myself to speak under pressure, but in a safe environment. I continued the question and answer method, but this time I focused on speed. I gave myself no time to prepare, no pauses, no translation. If I asked a question, I had to answer immediately. What are you doing right now? I'm sitting at my desk talking to myself in English. How do you feel today? I feel tired but motivated because I know I'm improving. At first, my answers were messy. Grammar wasn't perfect. Words came out in the wrong order, but I kept going. Something incredible happened after a few weeks.
My brain stopped searching for English. It started using English. Thoughts formed faster. Responses became more automatic. I no longer felt stuck between two languages. English began to feel like a direct line from my mind to my mouth. That's when I realized I had crossed an invisible line. I wasn't just learning English anymore. I was thinking in it.
Rebuilding my pronunciation. Even as my fluency improved, there was one issue I couldn't ignore: my accent. People understood me, but I could hear it in their reactions. I didn't sound natural. My rhythm was off. My pronunciation gave me away immediately. I knew that if I wanted real confidence, I had to fix this, not by eliminating my accent, but by making my speech clearer and more fluid. I didn't have a personal teacher. I didn't have special equipment. So I turned native speakers into my teachers. I chose short clips from movies, YouTube videos, and podcasts. I listened carefully to one sentence at a time. Then I paused the audio and repeated it exactly the same way. Same speed, same emotion, same melody. This technique is called echoing, and it changed everything. I wasn't just repeating words, I was copying music, the rise and fall of the voice, the stress, the pauses. At first it felt uncomfortable. My mouth wasn't used to moving that way, but repetition rewires habits. I practiced for at least 30 minutes a day. Slowly, my voice started to sound different, more relaxed, more natural. Sometimes I recorded myself and compared it to the original. The difference was obvious, but it was shrinking. One day, someone said something that stayed with me. "Your English sounds really natural." That sentence meant more to me than any test score. It was proof that the work was paying off. Learning words the right way. As my speaking and pronunciation improved, I faced another important question: vocabulary. I knew that words mattered, but I also knew from experience that memorizing long lists didn't work. I had tried that path before, and it only led to frustration. So instead of asking, how many words should I learn, I asked, how can I make new words stick? The answer was context. I limited myself to just 5 new words a day, not more. 5 was manageable, but there was a rule. I had to use all 5 in a short story, every single day. The stories were simple, sometimes they were silly, but they were powerful because they created connections in my brain. For example, if my words were excited, invitation, arrive, party, surprise, I would imagine a situation and write it down. I read the story out loud again and again. Then I looked for chances to use those words in real conversations, even if the situation wasn't perfect. This method turned vocabulary into something alive. Leaving translation behind. One of the biggest barriers to fluency is translation. Thinking in your native language first and then converting it into English slows everything down. I knew that if I wanted to speak naturally, I had to break that habit. So I trained my brain in a new way. I started describing the world around me in English. When I walked outside, I named everything I saw in my mind: the weather, the buildings, the people passing by. I didn't worry about perfect grammar. I focused on observation. The sky is bright. The street is busy. That man is wearing a red shirt. At night, I added one more habit: writing a daily journal in English. At first, my entries were basic, short sentences, simple ideas. But day by day, they became smoother. My thoughts flowed more easily onto the page. Then one day, something clicked. English words appeared in my mind without effort. I wasn't searching for them. I wasn't translating. They were just there. That was the moment I knew that I had crossed another major milestone. English was no longer a subject I studied. It had become a language I lived in. After a few months, I realized something surprising.
I had learned hundreds of new words without feeling overwhelmed. I wasn't forcing my memory, I was training it. English words stopped feeling like isolated pieces. They became part of stories, emotions, and real experiences.
The rule that changed everything. By this point, English was part of my daily life, but I knew something was still missing. Consistency. Motivation comes and goes. Some days you feel inspired, other days you feel tired, bored, or discouraged. I had learned the hard way that motivation alone was unreliable. So I created one non-negotiable rule. Every single day I had to use English for at least 2 hours. No excuses. If I had someone to talk to, I spoke. If I was alone, I talked to myself. If I was busy, I spoke while doing other things. I spoke while cooking. I spoke while cleaning. I spoke while walking outside. English stopped being something I studied and became something I did. On days when I felt lazy, I reminded myself why I started. I remembered the interview, the silence, the feeling of being unable to defend my own abilities. English wasn't optional anymore. It was my future. This daily immersion changed my relationship with the language. Instead of asking, "Do I feel like practicing today?" I asked, "How will I practice today?" That shift made all the difference. Discovering how English is really used. As my fluency improved, I noticed something that confused me. The English I heard from native speakers didn't always match what I had learned in school. People said things like, "I've been learning English for 5 months, but in class I was taught something different." At first I thought I was wrong. Then I realized something important. Textbooks teach rules, but real life teaches usage. So I became a student of real English. Whenever I heard a sentence that sounded natural, I didn't just repeat it. I asked myself why it was structured that way, why one tense was used instead of another, why certain words appeared together. I started paying attention to patterns. One of my biggest challenges was prepositions. On the bus, but in the car. At night, but in the morning. Instead of memorizing rules, I wrote examples, real sentences, situations, context. I carried a small notebook and filled it with observations. When I was confused, I searched for answers or listened more carefully to how native speakers talked. To reinforce this learning, I kept writing my daily journal, but now with a new goal. I didn't just write what happened, I tried to write the way native speakers would. I read blogs, I read articles, I noticed sentence flow and rhythm. Then I applied it. Slowly, my English became more accurate, not because I studied grammar books, but because I understood how the language worked in real life. And with that understanding, my confidence grew even stronger. Choosing courage over comfort. At this stage, my English was technically better than ever. I could form sentences. I could understand conversations. I could express ideas clearly. But there was one enemy left: fear. The fear of making mistakes, the fear of sounding foolish, the fear of being judged. I realized something uncomfortable. Many people never become fluent, not because they lack knowledge, but because they never allow themselves to be uncomfortable. I made a conscious decision. I would stop protecting my ego. Whenever I had the chance, I spoke English, no matter how imperfect it sounded. At work, at the store, with friends, I chose English over silence. Sometimes I made mistakes. Sometimes I used the wrong word. Sometimes my sentence structure wasn't perfect. And nothing terrible happened. People understood me. They listened. Some even helped me correct small errors. No one laughed. No one walked away. That realization was liberating. To push myself even further, I prepared a list of common conversation topics, simple, everyday questions that native speakers often ask.
How was your day? What do you do for work? What kind of food do you like? I practiced answering them until the words came naturally. Then I took the biggest step yet. I joined an online English speaking group. The first time I spoke, my heart was pounding. My voice felt shaky. But as the conversation continued, something changed. I realized everyone there was learning, just like me. We weren't competitors, we were teammates. English stopped being a test, it became a bridge. The moment everything fell into place. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror and started talking to myself in English, something I had done countless times before. But this time was different. There were no pauses, no hesitation, no translation happening in my head. The words flowed naturally, as if they had always been there. It felt unreal. Later that same day, I decided to challenge myself. I joined an online discussion with native English speakers. The topic was complex. Opinions were strong. Normally, this word terrified me, but I reminded myself how far I had come. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't freeze. I shared my thoughts clearly. I responded to others. I asked questions. I followed the conversation without getting lost. People nodded. They listened. They engaged with what I was saying. In that moment, I knew. I wasn't learning English anymore. I was using it. 5 months after starting my journey, I had reached fluency, not because I was perfect, but because I was confident, consistent, and courageous. The person who once stayed silent in interviews no longer existed, and I was ready to return to the dream that English had once taken away.
Facing the dream one more time. 5 months earlier, that company had rejected me. Not because I lacked ability, but because I couldn't speak. This time, I was different. When I submitted my application again, there was no panic, no doubt. I didn't rush or overthink it. I simply prepared, calmly and confidently. When the interview invitation arrived, I didn't celebrate. I smiled. On the day of the interview, I sat in front of my computer just like before. Same screen, same format, but a completely different mindset. As the interview began, the interviewers greeted me in English, and this time I greeted them back without fear. The questions came. I answered clearly. I explained my projects with confidence. I described my thought process without searching for words. I wasn't translating. I wasn't guessing. I was communicating. I could see it in their expressions. They weren't struggling to understand me. They were engaged, curious, impressed. I wasn't just speaking English. I was owning it. When the interview ended, I closed my laptop and took a deep breath. There was no replaying mistakes in my head, no regret. I knew that I had shown my true self. For the first time, the outcome didn't define my worth. The call that made everything worth it. A few days later, my phone rang. I answered it casually until I heard the words that changed everything. "Jake, congratulations, you got the job." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The same company that had once rejected me now wanted me. They saw my skills, they heard my ideas, they understood me. The offer was more than I had imagined, a starting salary of $5,000 a month. More than money, it was validation. I stood there holding my phone, hands shaking, eyes filling with tears. The first people I called were my parents. "Mom, Dad, I did it!" My mother cried. My father, usually a man of few words, simply said, "We always knew you could." With my first salary, I bought my father a watch, something he had always wanted but never bought for himself. For my mother, I chose a gold necklace, a small symbol of gratitude for years of sacrifice.
They tried to refuse. "We don't need anything," they said, but I insisted. "This is my way of saying thank you." In that moment, I understood something deeply. Learning English had never been just about language. It was about dignity, opportunity, and becoming the person I always knew I could be. This is where your story begins. Looking back, the transformation didn't happen overnight. There was no magic trick, no secret talent, no perfect moment when everything suddenly became easy. What changed my life was a series of small decisions repeated every single day. The biggest lesson I learned is this: English is not something you memorize, it's something you live. For years, I believed I wasn't good at languages. That belief kept me stuck. The moment I changed my mindset, everything else followed. I stopped saying I'm bad at English and started saying I'm improving every day. That shift alone opened the door. I surrounded myself with English. I changed my phone's language. I watched movies, listened to podcasts, and followed English content daily, not to understand everything, but to train my ear and my brain. Even when I didn't fully understand, I kept listening. I chose to speak without fear. I made mistakes, many of them, but I learned that mistakes are not failures. They're proof that you're trying. Native speakers don't expect perfection. They respect effort. Listening became just as important as speaking. Through shadowing and repetition, I trained my ears and my voice at the same time. I didn't chase a perfect accent. I chased clarity and confidence. I stopped memorizing vocabulary and started learning words in context. Stories, emotions, and real situations made words stick naturally. Grammar stopped being a list of rules and became a pattern I understood through use. Most importantly, I chose consistency over perfection. Some days I practiced for hours, other days only a few minutes, but every day I did something. That habit changed everything. And now I want to tell you this directly. It doesn't matter where you start. It doesn't matter how broken your English feels right now. What matters is that you start today. Imagine yourself 6 months from now, speaking confidently, expressing your ideas clearly, no longer hiding behind silence. Imagine the opportunities that will open up, the confidence you'll gain, the version of yourself you'll become. If I could go from freezing in an interview to owning the room in English, so can you. The pain of discipline is temporary, but the pain of regret lasts forever. So choose discipline, choose growth, choose yourself. Your journey to fluency doesn't start someday. It starts now. And if this story gave you even a small spark of belief, don't let it fade. Take action. Speak today. Listen today. Practice today. I'll be here, walking this journey with you. Let's do this together.